Story 1. My aunt is a retired high-end realtor. She got involved in helping arrange housing for wealthy Formula One fans. These affluent individuals are from another world. Renting one mansion for a week is not sufficient. They require 6 to 8 mansions next door to each other for a month to accommodate their private medical staff, legal teams, chefs, airplane mechanics, and more. They arrive on multiple private jets and sometimes rent entire airports for the weekend. One person even paid to have a helicopter pad constructed on a property he rented, only to have it removed once he was finished. All of this for a weekend getaway. Story 2. About 20 years ago, I was the personal assistant and nanny for a wealthy family in Southern California. At first, they were lovely people, but slowly their dysfunction overtook their happy facade. The husband spent most of his time away and barely checked in with his family. The wife embodied the bored, neglected affluent second wife, who ignored her only child in private but pretended to be the ideal mother in public. She would attend one yoga class and one high society function each day, then spend the rest of the day lamenting how difficult and stressful her life was. The child was neglected, unloved, and acted out constantly. He reminded me of children from Russian orphanages who were not held as babies and grew up unable to form attachments to others. He essentially lived alone in this mansion with only myself, the cook, the housemaid, and his mother, who barely spoke to him and whom I rarely saw hug him or play with him. I mostly drove him to school and to all the activities he didn't want to do, helped him with his homework, and tucked him in at night. No matter how I tried to bond with him, he hated me. I understood that all he needed was his parents' love and attention, and he didn't want me as a replacement. I ended up getting fired after the holidays because I was tasked with planning their Christmas vacation. After a month of intense preparation, booking a private villa, organizing their private jet, coordinating the house staff at the location, ordering all the necessary food, and arranging activities, the wife decided 2 days before their departure that she no longer wanted to go to that location but to a private island instead. When I informed her of the lack of availability at the new destination and the cost of lost deposits while providing a list of alternatives, she blamed me for ruining their holiday because I should have anticipated and planned a backup at the exact location she wanted, which she had never mentioned. I was relieved to be fired from that mausoleum of wealth and despair. Honestly, I have enjoyed reading the news over the years about the husband moving on to his 4th and now 5th much younger wives, getting caught up in legal drama for corruption, and the wife fading into obscurity after her divorce from her high society position. Unfortunately, I have seen the child's social media, and he has turned out to be another affluent, soulless individual, likely trying to live out his father's life in an attempt to earn his attention, love, and respect. Story 3. I am a pool cleaner, and I used to service the pool for the inventor of a popular adult product. He was quite an unusual person and very wealthy. He lived in Texas and owned multiple houses on a ranch, as well as an extravagant space dedicated to adult entertainment filled with similar products. There were often naked models having photo shoots. I entered this space once, and it had beaded curtains everywhere and an unpleasant odor. It was a strange experience. Story 4. I worked on a $3 million wedding. My in-laws own the premier florist in town. The flower budget was $250,000, but they exceeded that significantly, with the final cost being over $480,000. The wedding took place on the bride's father's property, which encompasses over 600 acres. It featured 3 houses, 2 churches, a barn, and a private polo field. The horse stalls were nicer than my first apartment. The barn was Amish-built. The owner found it in New York State, had it dismantled, and reassembled on his property, converting it into an apartment. I had to move a painting from the mantel for decorating, but I was told afterward that it was worth $1.5 million. The tent for the wedding could have accommodated 2 of Barnum and Bailey's 3 rings. Everything was extravagant. However, while talking to the father, I found him to be an exceptionally nice man. You would never know he was wealthy. Story 5. I fly private jets for a living. The levels of excess and indulgence I see are astounding. $50,000 worth of dishes that never get used. A vacation to Norway last year cost around $450,000. The plane I fly right now is worth approximately $40 million. transporting the family dogs on the jet for an hour to their preferred groomer, a day trip to Maui just to obtain a same-day passport, $34,000 per month for our satellite-based Wi-Fi. Story 6. I worked as a nanny for about a year for a wealthy family. The mother's closet was as large as my entire first floor. She never paid attention to her 4 boys and spent her days shopping for 8 to 10 hours. I often helped her carry in carloads of clothes, purchasing thousands of dollars worth each day for a year. Midway through my employment, I asked for a raise from $9 an hour to $11 an hour for caring for the 4 boys. She declined, so I quit that day. Story 7. My friend's wife flies to Aspen when she has a headache, not for treatment but to breathe better air. Meanwhile, I treat my migraines by turning off the lights and placing a wet cloth over my forehead. Story 8. My niece received a scholarship to an excellent university that she would never have been able to afford. Therefore, many attendees came from wealthy backgrounds. She was fortunate to share a room with really nice people. The girls she lived with often gifted her clothing and bags from high-end brands like Prada and Gucci, items that cost thousands of dollars. My niece would say, "I can't take this." The girls would respond, "Don't worry, I have another one that's almost just like it." Or, "My aunt gave it to me, and I just don't like the color." They were incredibly kind, but it was surprising that they thought nothing of giving away items that were so valuable. My niece would tell me, "They gave me a bag that's worth more than my car." Story 9. The majority of my clients have homes valued at over $5 million. One of my wealthiest clients, who likely has around $100 million in real estate, refuses to install smart or electric thermostats in his home. He dislikes the hassle of batteries, power outages resetting settings, and similar issues. As a result, you enter a large, beautiful waterfront home, and the old mercury dial thermostat maintains a temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit. He is truly self-made and often walks among the workers, distributing $100 bills to all of them. He is a genuinely great person, and his wife and children are as well. Other clients are less hospitable, and my invoices reflect that. Story 10. My wife is an attorney. All of her clients are wealthy individuals who are completely detached from reality. One of her clients gets a new car every 10,000 miles instead of having someone service the car for regular maintenance. Story 11. I did a bit of technical contracting and, by word of mouth, got into an elite clientele at some point. Here are a few interesting cases. 1. I had a client who lived in a mansion by himself and would pay us $1,200 an hour to plug in a TV. He requested a team of at least 4 people, all of whom had to be Asian, Chinese, Japanese, or Korean. So we would go over, plug in the TV, and then the next 2 to 3 hours were filled with him expressing his racist views, discussing topics related to World War II and white supremacy. My staff were briefed that this job was not about plugging in a TV. It was to get paid $300 an hour to stand there, smile, nod, and endure his remarks. This client called us once a month, and we were all happy to take his money. I honestly believe he was just lonely and struggling with some mental issues. I once had a client pay us to set up an audiovisual system inside a swimming pool. To clarify, inside a swimming pool. He wanted audiovisual fidelity underwater. When we arrived with all the equipment, it turned out the swimming pool hadn't even been dug yet. They hired another person to dig it on the same morning we were supposed to install the equipment. The pool he had previously measured was a sample one that he wanted torn out. They didn't want us to leave and return when the pool was finished, as they wanted workmen around to film something for social media. We ended up being paid $500 an hour to walk around and look busy, like extras on a set. I carried a spool of HDMI cable for about 6 laps around the house before I picked up a color calibrator and started pointing it at and plugging it into trees. I was asked to set up a watch party for a popular series in a cabin in the middle of nowhere with no road access. I was also informed that the cabin was not fully built yet and that there was no electricity or water in the area. We had 5 days. There was a large team of contractors running cables, lumber, and work crews doing shifts around the clock. But we managed to get a nice plasma television with a satellite connection, great Wi-Fi, septic systems, well water, electrical setup, emergency generators, and HVAC installed. In those 5 days, I probably earned around 30,000 Canadian dollars after expenses. Story 12. I have wealthy clients. Most of them are first-generation wealthy individuals who grew up on farms or worked on oil rigs. You would never know they are affluent. There is no shabbiness or suffering, but no ostentatious displays either. They have nice cars, but not nicer than many other people who are not wealthy. The difference is that theirs are paid for in full. They have vacation homes, purchased with cash and not heavily financed. Perhaps it's true that money talks, but wealth whispers. Story 13. I installed tile for a major city developer in his personal house. The property spans 45,000 square feet on 10 acres of coveted forest land. We needed 2 different satellite dishes for television service because one wouldn't cover the entire house. There were 2 separate tile crews, one for the interior and one for the exterior. An infinity pool was added after construction started, resulting in a $1 million addition. However, the most surprising detail was that the wife ordered a massive natural dark wood countertop from Cameroon. It took months to be delivered, and when she saw it in the house's lighting, she decided she didn't want it and sent it back. This couple even flew in a private barber from across the country to get their hair cut. Exorbitant wealth is truly astounding. Story 14. I worked for a summer cleaning boats at a yacht club to receive free sailing lessons. One very wealthy pharmaceutical family employed someone specifically to bake cookies and brownies, nothing else. Warm cookies and brownies were provided at certain times of the day. They had entirely separate culinary and pastry staff for other food preparation. She was a public school teacher who loved to bake, making it a great summer job for her. It still amazed me to consider the level of wealth required to hire staff for such specific tasks. Story 15. I used to manage the personal properties of a very wealthy farmer and developer. One morning, he was trying to explain to me about a garden he saw in San Antonio that he wanted to emulate. He became frustrated trying to describe it, so he got on his phone. An hour later, the gardener and I were with him on a flight in his private jet from Idaho. We were picked up by a private car service, taken to the garden, spent a half hour walking around, and returned to the jet. We didn't even stop for lunch. The cost of that flight was equivalent to 2 months of the gardener's and my salary. Story 16. I know someone who married a very wealthy girl in the 1990s, part of a multi-billionaire family. She was down to earth and completely relaxed. At their bachelor and bachelorette party weekend, they celebrated in separate family estates, his in Colorado and hers in Connecticut. Earlier that day, he mentioned to someone how there wasn't any good pizza in Vail, where they were partying. She had her assistant call his favorite pizza place in Boston, arranging for them to close for the night. They sent their 2 cooks and the owner on a private charter to Colorado with the supplies, closed down, and rented a local pizza restaurant in Vail, complete with a pizza oven. They surprised him with a dozen pizzas from his favorite place for his bachelor party. The total cost of everything was over $100,000 in 1990s money. They are still married now, over 30 years later, with adult children. His favorite pizza place closed when the owner retired, so he hired one of the cooks to be his private chef for a few years. Story 17. I did some work for a bank in Dubai. They had a department for elite clients, consisting of people waiting for phone calls such as, "I need $500,000 in New York." The person in the office would then sort the paperwork in cash, jump on the next flight to the requested location, and hand deliver it. Story 18. I knew a billionaire well and worked closely with him for years. He was a nice guy, very smart, shy, and eclectic. He experienced a series of excellent business decisions after having a great childhood. While not all of it was luck, a lot of it was being in the right place at the right time. Over time, people mistook his luck and quiet demeanor for business genius and began to idolize him. As the years went by, he started to believe the hype and surrounded himself with sycophants who assured him they were his friends. Anyone who challenged him was exiled from his circle. It was hard to watch. He ultimately went down the path of trying to hack his own body, became heavily involved with drugs, and tragically passed away. Story 19. This seems obvious, but many people do not perceive money as a tangible asset. I may be out with a friend having drinks when he spots an apartment he likes, makes a call to his contact, and suddenly it's his. He has not seen the inside, he just likes the appearance and the neighborhood. Their perspective on travel is also unrealistic. For example, someone might say, "Thank you for the unexpected offer to bring me to Rome for a week, but I have responsibilities tomorrow." Story 20. My brother is very wealthy, and if you follow technology, you would probably know who he is. While he is essentially the same person he has always been, and I always enjoy spending time with him, the biggest change I have noticed over the years is that he does not care about money. He uses it to solve issues that might not actually be problems in the most expensive way possible, as his decision-making process is quick and effortless. For instance, he will spend $100,000 to address a concern that I wouldn't have even considered a problem, simply because the decision to spend that amount is trivial for him and the issue only annoyed him for a few minutes. He also has an extensive property that caters to his wishes whenever he desires. He has a spa that operates all year round on his estate, and he might visit for a massage about twice a week. However, I always enjoy visiting him. Story 21. I spent years working for multi-billionaires in their private homes. Here are a few memories that come to mind. 1. Purchasing 30 pounds of top-quality filet mignon and asking the butcher to grind it so the chef could make hamburgers for the principal's annual Super Bowl party. I thought the butcher was going to cry. Sneaking into a child's bedroom in the early hours of the morning and setting up 500 inflated helium balloons so that the child would wake up to a balloon extravaganza on their birthday. Sending a housekeeper and gardener 90 minutes up the coast to Malibu to collect waste that the principal's dog had left on the private beach used for its morning walk. The samples were collected in 2 separate baggies to be sent to 2 veterinarians for evaluation, because you simply can't trust the opinion of just one veterinarian. There was nothing wrong with the dog other than the principal had fed it cheese. Spending over $500,000 on empty hotel rooms over the course of 3 months. I had to reserve the rooms and have them stocked and ready to go in case the principal decided he wanted to use them. He rarely did. Bribing a group of university researchers to reschedule their research trip on an icebreaker ship in the Svalbard archipelago because the principal wanted the ship for those dates to take photos of polar bears and whales. After 3 days, the principal and his spouse both got bored of Norway and returned home early. Story 22. My girlfriend was a mobile dog groomer in San Francisco. She groomed dogs at several homes on Billionaires Row. With most of her clients, she interacted with the owner of the dog. However, at one house on Billionaires Row, she did not interact with the owner or the butler, but with the dog butler. The dog butler did not groom or walk the dogs. He coordinated the schedules of the dog walkers and the dog groomer and reported to the butler. Story 23. I worked for the chief executive officer of a major bank. This individual also sits on the board of multiple other companies and charities. They were constantly traveling for work and were basically never home. They had an 8-year-old child who was cared for almost exclusively by a nanny who barely spoke English and spent most of the day on the phone with her family back home, fully ignoring the child. The child had poor grammar and could barely read. She was very immature for her age. I don't know for sure if she had an intellectual disability, but I believe she was just really neglected. She would sit by herself for hours watching television shows meant for toddlers. The house was obviously huge and gaudy beyond belief. The driveway was full of luxury cars that never seemed to get driven because the chief executive officer was transported by a chauffeur. I was at the house one day and watched the little girl shriek with delight and run full tilt towards her parent with her arms outstretched for a hug as the chief executive officer stepped through the front door. They had been away all week traveling for work. As the little girl went in for a hug, the chief executive officer said, "I have to go. My driver is waiting," and then closed the door in the child's face, leaving for another week. It seemed obvious to me that this person was an absolute workaholic who should not have become a parent. I later learned that there was a teenager who was in some preppy boarding school and only came home on the weekends. It was really sad. Story 24. I work at a high-end restaurant that has some extremely wealthy clientele. One couple came in on a weeknight. They were drinking a bottle of wine worth about $1,200. She became a little animated and spilled a full glass all over her $10,000 dress and $7,000 purse. Her reaction? She just laughed and said she was going to soak the dress in more of the same wine when she got home so it would match. She also mentioned that she was planning to go purse shopping soon, so she would just buy another one the next day. Her husband was not even fazed. He was chuckling alongside her. The only reason I knew how much the dress was worth was that he told us. Story 25. What I have learned from being around billionaires regularly for the past 30 years is that they are never satisfied. Story 26. I used to work in ski rentals. An extremely wealthy family came in and spent over $1,500 to rent equipment for just an hour as the lifts were about to close. Ski passes for their entire group were probably around $1,000. They didn't bat an eye. When they returned, one of the women in the group told me she didn't know how to tie her shoes. She placed her shoe in front of me and demanded that I tie it for her. I simply said, "I'm not going to do that." She rolled her eyes at me and had her husband tie them for her. I worked in tourism for 6 years, and the individuals with more money than I could ever hope to have were some of the most foolish people I've ever met in my life. Story 27. I grew up in an area where many wealthy people had seasonal homes. I worked with glass, plastics, mirrors, and more, creating everything from generic items to specifically custom-made products. A common response I encountered when presenting clients with options was, "Just give me the most expensive options." They were not focused on quality or aesthetics, but solely on price. You would be surprised at how unappealing a house can look when decisions are based solely on the most expensive choices, disregarding other important factors. Some of these multi-million-dollar homes were outright unattractive. Story 28. Private air charter. I once saw a woman fly herself and her dog to Aspen, Colorado, because she liked the groomer there. The dog groomer was out sick when the woman arrived. She then flew home empty-handed and returned a few days later once the dog groomer was available. All said and done, she spent about $75,000 on a private jet to fly herself and her dog to Aspen and back twice so she could get the person she wanted to bathe her dog. I also watched a woman fly from Florida to California to spend the day shopping in Beverly Hills because she was annoyed at her husband. She shopped all day and flew back the next morning. She spent about $100,000 on the last-minute flight, plus the cost of her purchases. She bragged that she used her husband's credit card for everything. She had armloads of clothes and purses. The next day, we found a price tag for one of her purses on the airplane, and it was over $10,000. Story 29. I work in the luxury industry and have seen numerous Ferrari showrooms. I don't mean dealership showrooms or a room that simply has a Ferrari in it. I mean a residential car showroom filled with Ferraris. I have encountered about a dozen of these residential Ferrari showrooms over the years, which suggests there are hundreds of people with them. As a side note, I have met quite a few billionaires who fit the stereotype of being pretentious. You would not be surprised to hear the names of some of those individuals. However, for every pretentious billionaire, there are just as many who are genuinely nice and down to earth. Surprisingly, this doesn't always correlate with how they acquired their wealth. Some who were born into it are really nice, while others who grew up poor and became self-made can be unpleasant. I had one billionaire client for whom I completed a project in his penthouse in a Manhattan skyscraper. He asked me if I was hungry, and I replied, "Yes, I could eat." He left and returned an hour later with burgers and fries for both of us. We spent time together at his dining table, with a Pollock painting hanging nearby, discussing camping and fishing while enjoying our burgers. He was a truly awesome person. Story 30. I worked on a private island once. A billionaire guest asked for ice cubes made from Evian because tap water ruins the flavor of 200-year-old scotch. Story 31. My boss is very wealthy. It's kind of endearing that he always advises me to find a 10% coupon online. I can tell him, "Sir, I have just saved you $12. He still stays in more affordable hotels on the company budget. That said, he also invested $1 million of his own money to have a more authentic experience on a recent project. The surprising. Story 32. I train dressage horses. The guest homes I have lived in are larger than the homeless shelters I have stayed at. Story 33. I have friends who work on super yachts. They have shared several stories, but one that stands out is about a yacht with a unique fish tank. This yacht also featured a snow room, equipped with a snowmaking machine, where guests could enter at any time to play in the snow. The fish tank ran the entire height of the staircase, allowing people to see fish as they moved between levels. Sounded amazing. However, there was a problem. One of the fish in the tank was a shark. Each week, the shark would eat all the other fish, leading to a weekly expense of $50,000 to replace them. Story 34. I had a conversation with my girlfriend's friend who catered for the Ambani family in London. She had a real insight into their lives while staying at their mansion. One thing I remember her saying is that the children and teenagers would stop and wait at doors for someone to open them. She wasn't sure they had ever opened a door in their lives. Story 35. I worked as a personal assistant for a wealthy individual for about 3 months. I do not know his net worth, but it was definitely in the tens of millions of dollars. His house was valued at $5 million alone, and I know he owned many other properties across the country and worldwide. He inherited most of his wealth and was involved in real estate. Let me tell you, this individual was quite unfortunate. He had no friends and somehow maintained a girlfriend whom he clearly despised. He confided in me that he planned to break up with her because he was paranoid that she only wanted him for his money. He had a very expensive breed of dog that he took everywhere, but he did not bother to train her, making her impossible to control and constantly stressed. He was in his late 50s and lived in a multimillion-dollar house but had not bothered to decorate, furnish, or even clean it. He had multiple living rooms that contained a large television and one recliner chair, and that was it. His guest bedrooms had only a mattress on the floor with nothing else. There was no art or decoration displayed anywhere in the entire house. Dog fur was everywhere, and dirty dishes and takeout containers littered the sink and countertops. It was obvious he had never once dusted or swept. I also learned that he had 2 siblings, one of whom he was completely estranged from. The other had recently passed away, and while sorting through his papers and conducting some online research, I discovered that he had sued his brother for complete control of some of their joint properties while his brother was actively dying from cancer. This individual's personality was equally repugnant. He was unpleasant and clearly held a very high opinion of himself, looking down on others despite being entirely helpless on his own. He did not know how to do anything besides instruct his lawyers to sue anyone who looked at him the wrong way and extract money from his numerous tenants. He was impossible to converse with. He never considered another person's point of view and would only talk down to you or use his size to intimidate, as he was a physically large man, which made his fragile ego all the more pitiful. He also had an unpleasant odor. His breath reeked, and he had body odor. I am not sure if he bathed himself regularly. I only knew this individual for 3 months 5 years ago, but I could go on and on about how truly awful he is as a person. He was constantly angry and miserable, even though he had more than enough money to relax and be happy. He truly reinforced for me the idea that money cannot buy happiness, or rather, money will not fill that empty, rotten hole inside your soul. Story 36. My brother was called the real estate appraiser to the stars because he focused exclusively on real estate appraisal in the Beverly Hills, Holmby Hills, Bel Air, and Malibu areas of Los Angeles County. The things he encountered were incredible, resulting in many stories, some good, some bad. However, perhaps the craziest aspect was his approach to pricing his services. He charged 10 to 20 times more than a typical appraiser in Southern California. While these were custom homes and not cookie-cutter tract homes, that still represents a significant price difference. His reasoning was simple. I charge this much because it's the only way these people respect my services and my time. When you're dealing with clients who will spend $50 million on a house, $100,000 on a car or watch, and $10,000 on a bottle of wine, they do not typically respect those who do not cost them something equivalent. Story 37. My son is a contractor. They just finished an outdoor party barn for a wealthy hedge fund manager. One room costing $120,000. They followed the architect's plans to the smallest detail, and it turned out beautifully. However, when the manager's wife saw it, she said she hated it and ordered it to be torn down immediately and replaced. That kind of waste and attitude sickens me. To top it off, they are out of state and may spend 2 to 3 weeks a year there. Story 38. When I was a student, I shared an apartment with another girl for a whole year. She was very wealthy, spoiled, and the apartment belonged to her grandmother. We were 21 years old, close to finishing college, but she was completely unprepared for real life. She had never done laundry before, so I had to teach her how to use the washing machine. She didn't know how to make her bed. She was afraid of the dark and begged me to let her sleep in my room. She never used the kitchen because they had a cook in her house, and none of her family members ever cooked. Her food was catered every day. Once, she asked me to make her a sandwich because she didn't want to touch the cheese with her bare hands, as it was icky. She drove a luxury car and was shocked that I didn't own a vehicle, believing that everyone did. She had no understanding of the world outside her bubble. She bought clothes every day of the week after college, spending hundreds of euros daily. She owned a television, so we had to watch what she wanted. If I suggested something else, she would become angry. Most of the time, I left the apartment to meet my friends, which made her even more furious. She resented that I had a social life outside of our time together. Her grandfather was a prominent, wealthy attorney, so our professors gave her high grades regardless of her performance because he donated a significant amount of money to the faculty. She graduated with top marks but remained clueless. She inherited the family business and is now a wealthy, entitled middle-aged woman who has never had to worry about anything in her life. Story 39. One time I cleaned Steve Harvey's golf clubs, and he walked away without tipping. A few seconds later, I heard someone say, "Look up," and I saw him on a balcony above tossing me a crumpled $5 bill. Story 40. I just filed a client's tax return this year, and he has to pay $10 million in taxes. I forgot if it was the Canada Revenue Agency or his bank that has a daily limit of $500,000. He had to pay $500,000 every day for 20 days straight. Not to mention, he already paid a couple of million in tax installments and withholding tax from employment. Story 41. I had a person who was one of the biggest casino operators in Las Vegas. He was also one of the largest holders of a gold exchange-traded fund. He wanted me to convert all of his exchange-traded fund holdings and take delivery of the physical gold, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He intended to showcase the gold bullion in Las Vegas and take it into the casino vaults as a publicity and marketing campaign. The exchange-traded fund was able to facilitate this, but it required extensive coordination among several depository banks around the world and bonded security measures, leading him to lose interest. A billionaire hedge fund manager I know paid $2 million to raise the floor of his personal office by 3 inches in a midtown office building because he is short and could not see Central Park while seated at his desk. A Seattle-based technology chief executive officer had a college friend who is an architect build him a Dr. Evil-like home. However, before starting that project, he had his friend construct a smaller home nearby where he could live during the multi-year construction. The chief executive officer's guidelines for the smaller home were to build it as if it were his own dream home. When construction on the main home was completed, the chief executive officer gifted the smaller home to his friend. Story 42. I was helping a friend who is an electrician. He works with many affluent clients. We went out to wire a new patio. The client spent over $100,000 on this patio, which includes a grilling station, televisions, nice pavers, and numerous electrical outlets. The project was completed in 2024. I recently returned to find that almost everything we installed had been removed, and he is now constructing a guest house that dwarfs the house I live in. It's a small mansion compared to a larger one. Story 43. I worked for a charity and interacted with high-end donors, meeting some of the wealthiest individuals in my country, along with various international celebrities and politicians. What I learned quickly is that they are extremely detached from the world, often recommending actions that are far beyond my or any normal person's budget. They all viewed themselves as products of meritocracy, despite coming from stable homes with some level of wealth, yet they were often amazed by the hard work I put in. Additionally, They tended to be insincere and very polite, frequently using their personal assistants to voice complaints on their behalf. I often felt like I was dealing with a child, learning to never say no, but instead insist that we would look into their requests while encouraging them to enjoy themselves in the meantime. The Interview with Donald Trump by Terry Moran was a painful illustration of how a billionaire reacts when faced with disagreement. For those who hold on to racist conspiracy theories, attending one gala will show you just how surrounded you are by people of privilege. Story 44. I work in mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineering, and sometimes I find myself designing for extremely affluent clients. Often, they become overly involved in the details of the design. I encourage questions, as I want my clients to feel comfortable with my work. However, it seems that many wealthy individuals believe they have knowledge about everything. This often causes projects to extend too long or leads to issues when the client thinks they know better and inadvertently create problems. Story 45. Art galleries will spend thousands of dollars to have a painting installed in a house to see if the client likes it. If the client does, they buy it and it stays on the wall. If not, it gets packed up and returned, and the gallery absorbs the cost. Story 46. Friends and family are billionaires legitimately from medical patents. One time, his dad was telling me how he wasn't selling the beach house at the Cape, worth about $10 to $15 million, because the house sitter takes care of the dog at that house when they travel. Story 47. Not super rich, but my friend asked me to help him with some yard work he was doing for his boss. We took the company truck and filled the bed with mulch. His neighborhood was a gated community, and the houses were probably around $2 million. His boss was a vice president in an oil company and likely earned a low seven-digit salary. We completed most of the work but forgot a rake for the bush trimmings. I went into the garage to find one. The only tools available were a small hammer, meant for hanging pictures, and a small rake. The rake resembled one used on a golf course, likely for a sand trap. It had 4 tines and could fit in a golf bag. It never occurred to me that someone wouldn't own a rake. Story 48. My friend went to the beach and decided to stay the night. He saw a house for sale and arranged to buy it on the spot under the condition that he received the keys immediately and everything in the house. Once inside, he realized it was the house they lived in and not a vacation home. It was full of very personal possessions like photo albums and keepsakes from their military career, as well as children's toys. He felt ashamed because he didn't even ask if they needed anything. It just didn't cross his mind. He wanted a place to stay and chose a house. That's as far as he thought. Story 49. My mother is in the legal field, and her former boss bought 4 condos in a building on Michigan Avenue in Chicago to turn into a single condo. My stepfather is the head of security for a billionaire hedge fund manager. He regularly takes private flights to run errands for them and has had to work on building armored cars for them, including Escalades costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Both families are some of the nicest people I have ever met, and they have taken care of my family in ways that go above and beyond what is considered normal kindness. Not all wealthy individuals are unkind. To answer the question, my stepfather's boss flew my family out to New York City for my brother's 30th birthday to see Billy Joel at Madison Square Garden. He paid for the best hotel and set them up at restaurants we could never afford, then flew them home on their private jet, just because they could, appreciated my stepfather and weren't going to use their jet for those couple of days. It's wild to think they casually spent what I would imagine to be $50,000 on my little brother's birthday without batting an eye. Billionaires are a different breed, but being affiliated with one does have its perks. Story 50. Tiles that were over 50,000 plus installation from Italy were installed in a large home spa. However, I didn't like them, so I removed them all, broke them, and replaced them with something else. Story 51. A huge real tiger on a taxidermy mount in the bedroom, gold leaf ceilings, and a mural on the spiral staircase that the artist took 6 months to create, which was then painted over because they didn't like it. This was all in the same house. Story 52. My grandparents are extremely wealthy, but they are also very frugal, which throws me off. My grandfather owns several supercars but only buys clothes at Target. Story 53. This applies to both the extremely wealthy and ordinary individuals. When creating a will for more than one child, I suggest liquidating your estate and dividing the funds as you see fit. Too often, I witness families torn apart because siblings cannot agree on how to handle physical assets or businesses, especially real estate. It is disheartening to see siblings who were once very close no longer acknowledging each other. Not everyone can agree to retain the assets as investments and share management fairly. Story 54. While working as a chauffeur, I witnessed a 10-year-old have a tantrum and throw the iPad he was playing with on the ground. Without hesitation, a nanny got out a new one and handed it to the child. A brand new one in the box. There was no discipline, no discussion, and no consequences. People wonder why the extremely wealthy act the way they do. Story 55. Have you ever seen the show Succession? The family dynamics and archetypes represented in that show are not exaggerations. It is true that life is better when your basic needs are met without worry, but a high level of wealth does not buy happiness, fulfillment, or a truly peaceful state of mind. I have known happy families of modest means and miserable, fractured wealthy families playing political games over managing their financial interests. They engage in posturing and infighting at opulent children's birthday parties instead of dancing with grandma and enjoying some cake. Story 56. I install glass windows, showers, and railings, essentially anything made of glass. At one large mansion, in their pool house that had not been completed after 7 years, they were removing the old shower glass and installing a newer style, even though it had never been used. The construction had taken so long that it was no longer trendy, so they replaced an unused shower system. Story 57. I used to paint houses in Malibu and was often in the homes of wealthy individuals. One man I became friends with used to trade large amounts of stock and even had me sit with him while he traded. The money was substantial, but the story I want to share about him is different. One day, he called me in and asked for my impression of a story he was going to tell me. This story changed my life. He would get to work around 5 a.m. and work late into the night. He began to notice that one of the clerks who worked for him was keeping the same hours. He asked me what I thought about this young clerk. I suggested that he was probably considering him as a potential dedicated vice president. He laughed and said, "Anyone who would work those hours for little pay is a fool." Story 58. I worked for a few billionaires on construction projects. They are wasteful. For example, we throw away half a burrito and feel guilty about it. Recently, I was redoing a bathroom that, just the week before, had Italian marble imported but was the wrong color for the toilets. He made us discard 5 new toilets at $5,000 each. For top-of-the-line mirrors at $12,000 each, Italian marble worth $250,000 in total, and various other items into a trash pit on his property. Instead of returning, donating, or selling the items, we disposed of them in a literal pit and covered it up. This was not an uncommon practice for the ultra-wealthy. Story 59. I once saw a 7-year-old child demand a bigger pool during a design meeting with architects, engineers, and contractors, and he actually got it. Story 60. I was the lead porter in an apartment complex for wealthy individuals. 90% treated me with respect and appreciated the hard work I did. They would buy me clothing from Tommy Bahama, and one resident hosted an Italian dinner for my 1-year anniversary. Another resident offered to take my wife and me to the most expensive steakhouse in the city, gave us tickets to sit on the field during a football game, and invited us for drinks afterward. I had to decline those gifts, but at Christmas every year, I received $25,000 from the residents. We all did. Rents started at $15,000 for a studio and $35,000 a month for a 3-bedroom unit. Many business owners lived in the building, including 2 best-selling authors and the owner of the most popular computer game in the world. 4 players from the local National Football League team also resided there. 1 artist lived in the building, and 3 people held her paintings, which were worth over $1 million. The residents would buy us food and treats, like the most expensive chocolates in town, which cost thousands of dollars. It was fun but very demanding. I went to a casino with a resident who would leave envelopes containing $2,500 in the restroom stalls, with the message, "Good luck." 90% of the residents were very nice to me, while the other 10% didn't acknowledge my presence. I greeted them all the time, but it felt like talking to the wind. Story 61. I know a wealthy individual. He retired early to volunteer. He now purchases and builds homes for those truly in need. Story 62. They may avoid the effort of learning the cost of something or negotiating, opting to hire someone for that purpose, such as a housekeeper or gardener. Story 63. I met more celebrities and CEOs than I can count. Some people have so much wealth that it's difficult to imagine their lifestyles. I learned they do not concern themselves with others because of their financial status. I once asked a gentleman to stop smoking next to our jet fuel truck, which was topped off with 5,000 gallons of fuel. He told me, "Why don't you go and find someone to tell me I can't smoke here?" While I was offended by his lack of concern for everyone's safety, I also appreciated his carefree attitude and walked away laughing. Story 64. While in college, I worked summers at a small country club, marina, and golf course resort in Maryland. I worked the docks, the restaurant, the golf course, and overall maintenance. It was a lot like Bushwood. People like Paul Newman visited often, as his son attended a nearby liberal arts college. Bing Crosby and other celebrities from his era frequented the place. The marina was full of yachts whose owners came from Philadelphia, New Jersey, and New York City on weekends. Most just sat on their yachts and rarely took them out. One week, General Motors had leased most of the property for an executive retreat, with top executives from the company. I was assigned bellhop duties at the time and was asked to take a woman who had just checked into her room. Her name was Miss LeBlue. After I showed her the room features, she wasn't listening. She was busy swapping out bulbs in the lamps by the bed with blue bulbs. She was the talent for the week. Another time, I worked the buffet line in the upscale restaurant. The place looked fancy from the outside, but the owner was operating on a shoestring budget, so we often ran out of items for the buffet. This was the case one night when a family of 5 arrived fairly late. Many food items were gone, and there were no refills. The father raised a fuss in front of everyone and demanded to see the owner. Since the owner was in Florida, I went back to the office of the older woman managing the place. She sat at her desk, head in her hand, a half-empty bottle of alcohol nearby. I informed her that someone wanted to see the manager. She looked up and slurred, "The manager is in Florida." I returned to the dining room to handle the situation. As I walked past a table of regulars, the head of that party, who owned the Philadelphia Phillies at the time and had been observing the drama, grabbed my arm and asked, "Did they come in on a boat?" I told him yes, they were moored out in the creek. He mentioned he would go out and cut his boat loose, but I discouraged him. One thing I observed was that most yacht owners, and I mean large yacht owners, were quite nice and often gave us side jobs cleaning their boats between weekends and stocking their fridges, which provided good extra money. However, the sailboat owners were the most entitled, expecting to be treated like royalty and tipping almost nothing. We referred to them as 10-cent millionaires. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.